Hi, I am Kate Ryan Mosley. I'm a reporter from MIT Technology Review, and right now I'm speaking to you from my apartment in downtown Boston that sits about half a mile from our office. And like many of you, I've been working remote for over a year now. I actually just properly set up my desk for the first time this very week. And I think my severe procrastination in doing so is probably a reflection of just how temporary I thought work from home was going to be. I never really took a moment to think about how I can be intentional in my remote professional life. And just as I finally did so, we're starting to have conversations about going back to work. It's beginning to dominate Zoom calls with friends as we ponder what remote life is going to be, whether it's here to stay, what work and cities are going to look like, and how we're navigating that unnatural, tentative transition back to normalness, whatever that means. Here to guide us is Bob Posen, who thinks deeply about what all this means for the workplace. Bob Posen is a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Business, where he teaches courses on personal productivity, financial innovation, and corporate governance. Previously, Bob was the president of Fidelity Investments and the executive chair of MFS Investment Management. He's the author of 7 books and recently published his latest, Remote Inc. How to Thrive Wherever You Are. Bob, thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be with you, Tate. Glad to be in your kitchen or your den where you're finally set up. I like it.
Exactly. Thank you. So with the pandemic, a lot of our remoteness has been reactive more than proactive. Certainly mine has been. And right now, business leaders are trying to decide what to do going forward. I'm curious your take on the significance of this moment and the sort of calculus that is going on in the mind of a lot of business leaders.
You're right. This is a very significant transition because, as you say, 50 or 60 million people were thrown into remote work last March, and they didn't really have a chance to think about what's the best configuration or how do you design this. But now there are a lot of businesses that are gradually coming back in. Many organizations are saying we're going to go quote unquote normal in Labor Day. But the question is, what is the new normal? How does that look? And we have a wonderful opportunity now to really think hard about what is the optimal combination of work at home and work in the office, and how can we design that in the best possible way. So it's a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it seems to me like are some divides in opinion on what should happen. I've certainly noticed gender divides, generational divides on what people's preferences seem to be. Do you have a sense of why some of those cleavages in opinion exist? And, for example, I've heard people say some more traditional bosses feel like they want to be in person, seeing people doing work, managing their team physically. Do you think the pandemic has changed some of the ways we understand productivity and kind of like how these differences of opinion are playing out?
Well, I think you're right. There is a difference of opinion. PricewaterhouseCoopers did a survey, and senior executives in general wanted people to come back to the office at least 3 days a week, while going to employees, they wanted to be at home at least 3 days a week. So there really is a big difference. And why is it that senior executives are so keen on going back to the office? When I talk to them, a lot of them are concerned that they may lose the culture, what they view as a very positive culture of their organization, if people aren't there a lot. And, I think it's a legitimate concern. And that's why I don't think there are going to be many organizations that are going to go all remote. It is important for people to meet in the office, but I think things have really changed. And the idea that people are going to be 5 days in the office, I think that's going to be rare, just as it's going to be rare when we talk about how many companies are totally remote. It's the hybrid that most people want and most organizations are going to have to gravitate to. But, that's a complex question, and how to design that right. And I think we're going to struggle with that for a while.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm curious about this hybrid model. What do you think are the benefits of that? And do you think that's the optimal choice for most businesses?
I think for most businesses, it is the optimal choice. a hybrid model where people are in the office certain days and at home other days. Now, of course, we have to take out of our equation all the jobs which can't be done at home, like farming
Mm.
and driving a subway car and certain manufacturing jobs. But for knowledge professionals, which probably are the bulk of the people listening to this video, they do have a choice, and they can be in the office or they can be at home. So what we want people to do is look at the 5 factors, FLOCS, flocks. So the first one is function. We want to see people look at what's the nature of their job. Does it involve extended periods of concentration? That would suggest that they ought to do it at home. Or does it involve a lot of collaboration and brainstorming? So that would suggest they do it in the office. Second is location. Are the people in an organization located in a small city where they can easily get together? Or is there an hour and a half commute each way? So that would tend to go toward doing more at home. O is for organization. What's the organizational structure of the company or the team? And C is for culture, which we just talked about. How is the culture designed? What do people value most in the culture? And last of all is scheduling, the practical questions of getting everyone in the same team there on the same days. And here's the last point I want to make on that, Tate, is the answers that you come up with for these 5 factors may differ from team to team, even within the same organization. Think of, say, a financial services firm. They're a group or team of analysts. They're a group that does marketing. They're a group that does customer service on the phones. There's another group that does IT. So the answers for these questions may be quite different from team to team.
Yeah, I think that makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I feel like that's not necessarily the way these conversations are being had on a team-to-team basis, taking into account function. How do you think business leaders can go about taking an input on what the best course forward is? Do you think that should be, left up to employees? Do you think it should be organizational decisions? How would you recommend kind of figuring out what's best for each team?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it has to be a process. It should probably start with some interdisciplinary group from the organization studying these factors and coming up with some what I call tentative plans, and then trying them out on teams. And as I said, the teams may come out with different results for them. And I think we should try to recognize employee choice to the extent feasible, but we can't go too far on that. If we have 10 members of a team, we can't have 5 of them coming in on Mondays and Wednesdays and the other 5 coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, because then you lose all the benefits of having the team together on the same days. You also are really undermining your ability to save on real estate costs. So I think we want to sort of have a tentative plan. Maybe this summer is a good chance to try it out, good chance to socialize it among your employees, and then, come up with some answers in which you try to recognize individual choice. But ultimately, I think the team trumps the individual choice.
One thing I'm really curious about, and I feel like there's a lot of speculation on, which is, what are the long-term kind of social implications of having a more flexible work culture where maybe you're not going in every day? We have kind of full systems that are designed around the in-person 9 to 5, childcare, rush hour, corporate wardrobes. Do you think, there are any of those kind of cultural pillars that are attached to being in the office are going to be hard to let go of? Like, do you think there are going to be any downstream effects of going forward with a hybrid type of model?
Well, that's another good question. I think there are going to be some large-scale social implications. The first will be in the commercial real estate market and how it will be configured. So big cities like New York are probably going to find less of a demand for office space. And we've already seen smaller and medium-sized cities, Boise, Idaho, Austin, Texas, Sarasota, Florida, that have flourished because those are places where people can easily go. And I think we'll see more suburban offices where you'll have satellite offices where people can come in certain days. So that's one thing. And second is, I think there are a lot of actual political implications. If you have a lot of people moving, as we have now, from New York and California to Florida and Texas, well, you're going to have a whole new influx of people with different political views, and that will be significant. And I think, third of all, from the culture of the organization, I think people have to work a lot harder to maintain a culture of an organization. If you're around one city and people can come in the office 2 or 3 days a week, well, that can be a good way to have the culture of the office. But maybe you're going to even more spread out. So you may have to come in like 1 week a month. I know a company that I've been involved with where they're going to say the senior management team comes to New York 1 week a month, and that's where the decision making is going to happen. So that's a very different sort of approach. And lastly, I'll just say, which really goes to what you're talking about, is I think people are going to have to spend a lot more time structuring their own days. They have to figure out their own routines to have a ritual. I think ritual is very important for people's lives. And there was sort of a pre-structured ritual. You came in the office, you had your cup of coffee, you went to the meetings, etc. So now you're going to have to design your own rituals. You're going to have to figure that out. And I think that's really important for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Another thing I'm curious about is to what extent the hybrid model can take into account or increase the capacity for talent acquisition that, previously might have been really dependent on the local talent market. I think a lot of people are seeing remote work as a way to say, with a fully remote team, I can get the best people from anywhere. It doesn't really matter. But it seems like you're saying that might not necessarily be fully true. You still need some of the in-person for some teams to make them as productive as possible. So I'm just curious kind of how you think about the calculus for talent.
Well, I think the market for talent will be broader and it will be easier. It depends a lot on the structure that the company decides. If the company decides they're going to be in one city, but they're going to be spread out into, say, satellite offices, so then that will give people considerable leeway, and people want to live in rural areas and they're only coming to satellite offices 2 days a week. So that will have a lot more flexibility. And then there will be companies that will say, okay, you can live anywhere you want in the United States, but we're going to have a few regional centers and we want you to come back to the office 1 week a month to those regional centers. And third of all, you have the global companies. We already have lots of global companies. And I think most global companies, I used to run a global company, really work hard to try to get those offices around the world to work together. And it's not easy. I used to go to Asia and Europe 4 times a year just to go and visit all of the Fidelity offices there and really touch base with people. So if you're in that sort of configuration, you might need twice a year a global convention of your own people. And, you might have as many as, 500 or even 1,000 people from the company all come together once or twice a year. So I do think you'll have a lot more flexibility in where you can live, and therefore the talent market will be much broader. But I do think, on the other hand, you've got to sort of continue thinking about culture and organization, collaboration. So you got to have some mechanisms to do that.
Yeah. Do you think this will require any new skills for managers and team leaders if they're managing now a hybrid team? What are some of those skills that managers will need to navigate this?
Well, that's what I'm hearing a lot in talking to different companies is managers are telling me it's a lot tougher job managing a remote team than managing somebody in the office, because there, you just walk around, you see people, you could say management by walking around. But when you have a remote team, and then even more so a hybrid team, you've got to work a lot harder to keep the team together. So I would advocate at least three things. One is the manager of a team, a remote team, needs to have a weekly meeting, but the weekly meeting can't be past oriented, like reporting on what you did last week. That can best be done by email. What you really want is a forward-looking meeting in which people have a chance to discuss what are they going to do in the coming week, and maybe they could get input from other team members, suggestions as to who to contact or resources to go to. And that's the sort of meeting that can be really helpful. Second is managers need to touch base with the members of their team, I believe at least once a week, even if it's for a half an hour. And it's better to do it by video so there's more connection. They have to, show the members of the team they care, not just about how well they're doing, from a business point of view, but how they're doing personally, whether they need some help, whether they need some tech supplies, whether they need someone to help set up your office a little better, that sort of thing. And then third of all, we like to see managers of teams, remote teams, we'd like to see them have social occasions. People talk about cocktail hours, but other people have been a lot more creative, having games or even having cooking lessons where food is delivered to all the members' apartments and houses, and they all get a chance to cook together. So I think the social occasions for remote teams are really important because they don't have the natural day-to-day, relationships that grow out of just being there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is for managers to think about productivity and success differently. One thing that we do is performance reviews. How do you think that looks different, or employee evaluation looks different in the hybrid model?
Well, I'm been a huge critic of the typical performance review. Let's see, it happens once a year. It's very formal. You come in, you have this discussion. There's some sort of memo put together. It goes into the circular file, never to be heard again. And it's really not very useful. What I like to see is periodic performance feedback. That can happen every quarter, can happen after every project. And this is the key, that it be based on what I call success metrics. If you're a good manager, you can't, on the one hand, just give people vague general objectives like, develop more products or take care of your customers better. You need more specificity. On the other hand, you really shouldn't be micromanaging. So my solution to this problem is success metrics. That after you give a set of objectives, you agree with your team on success metrics. What do I mean by that? You say, okay, at the end of this month, when the project finishes, how are we going to know whether we're successful? And that's a very clarifying question, because then everybody gets on the same page. And the beauty of that is, once you have an agreement on success metrics, then for the team members, they can work when and how and where they want to. As long as they're getting the success metrics done, what do we care whether they're putting in 33 hours or 53 hours? It doesn't matter. And from the point of view of the team manager, it's better because then they don't spend all their time micromanaging and checking up on people. Instead, they can use their time much more fruitfully to find some new clients or come up with some new strategic ideas. So to me, periodic feedback based on success metrics, that's the key to team management.
And do you have any advice for the employees, people like me that are trying to figure out how to run my life remotely, my professional life remotely for the first time? Do you think there are ways to deal with, the burnout we get from being on screens all of the time, or manage our relationships with our bosses more productively?
Well, I think you've mentioned two different things. One is, I think you really have to work hard at not scheduling yourself on back-to-back Zoom meetings. There's so many people who tell me I go from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. Every hour there's a Zoom meeting. Well, that's a crazy schedule. I can't believe that you have to be on every Zoom meeting. So I insist that an agenda be set out in advance for every Zoom meeting, and then people have a chance to decide, is this really for them or not? If it's not really important for them, then they ought not to be there. I also like to see Zoom meetings ending definitely every 45 minutes. So you get 15 minutes in a break in between that. So, and lastly on meetings is when they end, I feel you really have to work at good closure. At the end of the meeting, somebody has to say, what have we decided and what are going to be the next steps? Because otherwise you have an inconclusive ending. People run away. There's no chance to talk to people leaving the room because you're remote. Now, in terms of people structuring their own day, I think the key is to think about your priorities. And I'd like people to come up with a set of annual priorities, but then they should translate it into weekly priorities and daily priorities. So the mechanism I suggest is that you have a two-sided schedule. You have your set of appointments on the left, but on the right, you say, what do I want to get out of this meeting or this phone call? And if you can do that, then you can switch to a much more active approach. A lot of people go through the day just going to other people's meetings, going to other people's conference calls. They've essentially doing other people's priorities and not their own. So you have to start thinking about your priorities, and you have to think, what are your success metrics going to be at the end of the week, the end of the month? How are you going to know whether you've achieved your own success metrics?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think there's a lot of useful advice in there that I will personally take from this conversation. Bob, I want to give the closing thoughts to you. The last question for you. What are your kind of closing advice for all of us as we start to enter this transitional, perhaps long-term transformational period of work?
Well, I think it's an exciting time, and we all ought to view this as an iterative process. This is an opportunity for everybody to think differently about how they work, how they commute, how they deal with other people in their team, how organizations are put together. And we have to realize that we might not get it right the first time. I mean, we had this pandemic, and as you say, we all just rushed into remote work. Now we have the chance to do it right, but we ought not to think that we're going to get it right immediately. So what we ought to do is try to look at all the factors, do the best we can, and then run it for 3 months and see how's it going. But we ought to be ready to change it. And I think if we can view this as an iterative process in which we're all learning, we can really come out with some really great results over time. And we'll all feel more productive in our work, and we'll also feel more satisfied. And that would be a great result for everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. It was wonderful talking to you. And, I think there's a lot of insight that everyone's going to take away from this. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to me, Tate. I really enjoyed it.